Hola a todos, ¿qué tal estáis? Hola Fa.
Hola Sebas, ¿cómo estás?
Muy bien, bienvenidos a esta conversación. Bueno, yo estoy muy nervioso, no sé cómo estás tú, Fa.
Estoy reprimiendo lo que va a pasar en el siguiente rato. Ya después me estreso de lo que sucedió. Estoy tratando de disfrutar.
Bueno, lo afrontaremos juntos. En fin, bueno, para aquellos que no nos conozcan, yo soy Sebas Gemouret, booktuber español, escritor, periodista, hago muchas cosas en internet, ¿vale? Tal vez
¡Ay!
me conozcáis por... Tal vez me conozcáis por el canal del coleccionista de mundos.
Me
Y tenemos a
suena.
Fa también.
Ay, hola, yo soy Orozco. Esta es una presentación, de dos lados del mundo. Es muy emocionante. Nos reunimos dos lectores a celebrar a otro lector y contador de historias. Yo,
Ujú.
bueno, a mí me pueden encontrar en muchas partes del internet, principalmente como Orozco. Me dedico a disfrutar historias prácticamente. También trabajo en libros, pero principalmente, bueno, ahí me encuentran como Orozco en todas partes.
Bueno, pero el día de hoy no vamos a estar solo tú y yo, Fa. No sé si te lo han dicho, no sé
No,
si te lo han contado.
no sé si tienes 2 semanas guardando este secreto.
El día de hoy compartiremos conversación con un autor, bueno, internacionalmente conocido. Él es John Green. En castellano conoceréis títulos como Bajo la misma estrella, Ciudades de papel, Mil veces hasta siempre. Ha sido traducido a más de 50 idiomas, número 1 del New York Times bestseller. Es decir, estamos ante una verdadera personalidad y sobre todo del mundo de la literatura juvenil, ¿no?
Claro, este es un momento muy bonito para dos chiques que se dedican al internet y los libros, poder estar aquí, porque no solo John trabaja contando historias de esa manera tradicional, sino que es cuenta historias en muchas presentaciones. En el 2007, uno de sus proyectos más largos, yo creo, comenzó, que es su canal con su hermano Hank Green, quien también es escritor, es su principal colaborador, también es escritor, tiene una novela increíble, An Absolutely Remarkable Thing, ciencia ficción maravillosa. Entonces, en el 2007 empiezan el proyecto que se llama Brotherhood 2.0, donde durante un año se dedican a solo comunicarse por medio de video. Esto se transformó con los años, pero lo siguen haciendo. Videos de 4 minutos donde se responden uno a otro y en el camino uno disfruta también como su audiencia. A esto se le suman un montón de otros proyectos en línea, desde Crash Course, que son estos cursos y clases educativos tremendamente importantes para quienes a lo mejor no tienen tan buena relación con el aprendizaje. Estos cursos son maravillosos. John ha sido host presentador de específicamente el curso de literatura. Y bueno, se suman un montón de cosas, si es Mental Floss, si es The Art Assignment, el mismo Bitcoin, que es una conferencia súper importante en el mundo del Internet, que él y su hermano de nuevo, Hank, su principal colaborador, hacen juntos. Entonces, es muy maravilloso, la verdad, poder estar charlando aquí, porque a esto se suman podcasts, ¿no? Tiene
Ujú.
Dear Hank and John, que son cartas a ellos y es muy divertido. Y además tiene este podcast de nombre The Anthropocene Reviewed. En español se puede traducir como el Antropoceno reseñado, pero este es el título de su nuevo libro también, que se llevó a cabo como Tu mundo y el mío. Entonces es muy bonito poder estar aquí hablando con un fellow workaholic, que podemos conversar muchas cosas muy interesantes.
Pues sí, la verdad es que al final es un contador de historias en muchísimos
Ujú,
formatos y de muchísimas maneras y desde hace muchísimos años. Y yo creo que
ujú.
podemos ya darle paso, ¿no? Porque para estar tú aquí y yo hablando, pues mejor hablar con él.
Basta. Sí, por supuesto. Hello, John.
All so much. It's so nice to see both of you, Sebas and Fa. Nice to see you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Oh,
I'm
thank you for
sorry
your
that we're not.
time.
I'm sorry that we're not speaking in Spanish. I would really like to, but my Spanish is truly terrible. I was able to ascertain only that that was a very generous introduction.
It's okay. We don't mind. We're very used to consuming your content and even books in English. So it's a comfort to be able to not have the extra translation. So it's all right. Everybody at home does have either subtitles or a voice. So we're all covered, I think.
Great.
So, John, I don't know if you remember, but we met some years ago. It was
Paper Towns.
During Paper Towns, during the time that you were doing the promotion of the Paper Towns movie in Spain. It was 2015, I think, a long time ago. We've both changed a little bit. And first of all, I want to thank you because I've never had the opportunity to thank you, because that was one of the most acclaimed videos of my channel. It gave me thousands of views and new audience. So first of all, thank you. And I like to use it as a metaphor now that all these years have passed since then, 6 years, of how BookTube was back then, the international community of BookTube, and how it is now, because your books are a huge part of the BookTube community. I'm sure you know that. The impact, of course, of The Fault in Our Stars and all the other publications, your young adult novels, really... They were a huge moment of the BookTube community. And I want to know, how was your experience during that time? Did you feel all the support of the community for your books? Because you're like a huge part of all the movement.
I definitely felt a lot of support, and still feel a lot of support for my work from people online and from creators online and from BookTube especially. I remember our conversation in 2015, both because you were a great interviewer and because it was one of the first times when I felt like the movie studio was beginning to understand how important YouTube was and how important YouTube creators were. And instead of only kind of lining up interviews with traditional media outlets, it was really encouraging to see them engaging more deeply with independent creators.
Yeah.
And so I have definitely felt that support, and it's been wonderful to see BookTube grow. And in a lot of ways, writing this book was for me a way to go back to my roots, because I started out my professional career as a book reviewer. I was a book reviewer before I wrote books, and I reviewed hundreds and hundreds of books for Booklist magazine. And, obviously these essays are making fun of reviews to an extent, and trying to point out the limitations of them and what critical discourse and qualitative discourse can and cannot do. But I love writing reviews, and I love listening to and watching reviews too. So I watch a lot of BookTube videos as well.
Well, yeah, I have a comment a little bit like Sebas, in the sense of I also kind of owe a very huge jump, right, that my role in BookTube had, thanks to one video that it haunts me to this day, because everybody's like, do it again with another book, and I'm like, no, it was so much work, which is a book about the metaphors in The Fault in Our Stars, a video about the metaphors in The Fault in Our Stars. So that always ended up being the number one, and it was a lot of hard work, but I enjoyed it so much. I enjoyed it so much to be able to enjoy to kind of pinpoint metaphors and kind of the fun that you had with that book. Meaning, I have so much time because I need to fill in things, and I've been working for this in this for so long that let's just keep on working in this extra stuff, these metaphors, these things here and there. And I think that's so very enjoyable, not only about that one book, but about the stories that you tell. And maybe this, for people at home that is not very familiar with either the Anthropocene Reviewed or your very iconic Sports with John account, may seem like a jump, but I want to talk about football for one moment, if that's okay.
Great. I'd love to.
Because like 2 days ago, your Twitter has been on fire because of the cup that is going on, and that's lovely to see. But specifically, I want to talk about football because one of my closest friends Ahmed, we were talking about the Anthropocene Reviewed, the podcast. So we were chatting about that, and he said something that I never fully realized about the stories you tell, but I was like, oh man, he is right. Which is, there's just something about how John talks about sports that I don't care about football, even in a country where our passion for football is so huge, even in Spain as well, right? Not only in Mexico, but I don't care about sports. I don't care about football, but there's just something about the stories that John tells about football that is just makes me cry every time, like breaks my heart, and I don't understand, and I think that's fascinating. And I do agree. I think it's fascinating, and it's not. I believe it's not so much about how you tell these stories, but how you feel sports and how you feel football. So specifically, I would like to ask you, what do you think are those? I don't know how to call it, maybe humanity aspects of sports, but football specifically, that just makes you keep on falling in love with the world, which is the one thing that you want to keep on doing, said on the introduction of your own book. What do you think that is?
Yeah, I do think we're all looking, or I think we're all looking for things that help us to fall in love with the world, help us to feel deeply connected, help us to feel emotions that maybe we struggle to feel in regular everyday life. And for me, and for many millions of people, maybe billions of people, football is one of the main ways. It's one of the ways that I can cry. I mean, I can cry like when my football team is Liverpool, and when Liverpool won the Champions League in 2019, I was in a bar in New York City with a bunch of strangers. I didn't know anyone there. And after they won, there was a person who was hugging me, and he was crying. He was like sobbing into my shoulder. And I was like, why is this guy crying? And then I realized that I was also crying. And I was like, why am I crying? This is such a weird phenomenon. Like, what other than football can allow me to feel like that kind of connection with someone I don't know? And from, football is also a wonderful unifier. It's a wonderful kind of shared language for people. So, from Sierra Leone to Madrid to anywhere I travel, everyone can talk about football. Everyone wants to talk about Mohamed Salah. Everyone wants to talk about Lionel Messi. And that point of connection for me is really important as well. But as far as telling sports stories, I think that I try to tell them for people who, like you, who don't care about sports. Like, telling sports stories for people who care about sports is a whole different, that's all ESPN does all day, right? Like, there's lots of channels on TV, lots of books that do that. But I want to try to capture what's really moving and human about sports for people who may not understand, may not like have all of that shared background and experience in thinking about sports. So that's why in the book I wanted to write about Jerzy Dudek, who's this Polish goalkeeper who had a really amazing life. And a big part of his amazing life was that for the vast majority of his professional life, he never played. Like, he was a Real Madrid player for like 7 years and never played once. Like, it's an amazing story of a guy who kind of rose to prominence for basically one day. Like, he had one magical day. And I just love stories like that. So I want to always try to tell human stories, not sports stories. I don't want to tell human stories if I'm talking about board games, or if I'm talking about writing novels, or if I'm talking about sports.
I think that's lovely. And I'm happy you mentioned Jerzy Dudek, because we were going to jump to that eventually. So let's do it. Something very interesting about the Anthropocene Reviewed, and even prior, it comes from Blog Brothers. To me, as someone who has consumed the story and listened to the story, is that specifically, You Never Walk Alone and Jerzy Dudek is something that we have seen transformed, right? We can see it back into a 4-minute video to Hank and to the rest of the people who enjoy Blog Brothers, and then maybe into an 18-minute episode in the podcast of the Anthropocene Reviewed, and then 2 chapters in the book. So I think it's very easy to try to adapt something and like, okay, I need to not forget this part or whatever. But the very interesting thing is how the use of the limitations or the strengths that each of these formats have given you to tell this story, maybe, and how in the 4-minute video, in the 18-minute episode with the sound effects and all this, like even the song itself, you know, To Hear You Never Walk Alone in the version in the podcast just makes me cry every time. I don't want to think too much about it. And then the book, right? The stories, how that changes. So how do you come up? How do you go approaching those things? Meaning telling the same story in these very different ways that feel different, but they all have this either heartwarming or even gut-wrenching moment that is not the same. Like the use of these formats, writing in these different formats.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And it's something I think about a lot because I write a 4-minute video every Tuesday. I write an episode of the podcast every month or two. And then I write a book, which is a completely separate kind of thing for me. But they all do interweave and intertwine in all kinds of ways. Like usually when I write something, I'm not sure if this is true for you guys, but usually when I write something, I'm done. Like, I don't ever think about it again. I don't ever it's over. And the moment the moment the video goes up or the moment the book comes out or whatever, I don't think about that story anymore. But there are a few stories that do stay with me and that I find myself wanting to retell. So the Jerzy Dudek one is a good example of like, I made a Vlogbrothers video about this incredibly weird choice that this goalkeeper made in the most important moment of his professional life to not save penalties the way he had always saved them. And at the time, it was about one thing, but then I kept thinking about the story and I kept writing about it and it became about something else. It became about this astonishing human capacity we have to reinvent ourselves. It became about the capacity that, you know, we have, like the fact that we don't know what the future holds for us. And that's scary, but it's also wonderful. It's wonderful that we have amazing moments in front of us and we cannot possibly know what they are. And so the story became about that. And then as my understanding of the story shifted, the way that I wanted to write about it changed. So for me, format is a response to trying to understand what the story is about. Like, why do I keep thinking about Jerzy Dudek 15 years after he won the European Cup? I don't keep thinking about lots of better players who played for Liverpool in that era. So what is it about, I keep coming back to about Jerzy Dudek. And so for me, that's a way to go back to a story in a new, fresh way. And really, like, that's true for my novels too. Like when I was writing The Fault in Our Stars, I tried to write it for like 10 years before I finally found a way into it. And it was just the story that kind of like wouldn't stop being at the front of my mind. And so that's what I try to pay attention to when I'm writing.
Yeah, you know, everyone is going to say about this book that, oh my God, here it is, John Green's new book, which it's true, it is your new book, but at the same time, it has nothing to do with your other young adult novels. So first I want to know if for you, this is like a separate publication from your collection, if this book can fit on the same shelf next to Turtles All the Way Down, The Fault in Our Stars, Paper Towns, or if it was conceived as something different, which I think it was.
Yeah, it was definitely conceived as something different. And I mean, I'm still the same person. I'm still the same writer. I'm still, so I'm sure that I'm using a lot of the ways that I've used in the past to try to, create ideas inside of other people's minds with words. But I did want to do something different. I wanted to write as myself for the first time. I've never written about myself in any kind of formal way. I've written about myself, I guess, on Vlogbrothers and in other formats, but I've never written about myself in the kind of rigorous way that I try to write books. In a focused, concentrated, long-term way. And so that's the first difference. And then, the second difference is that as a result of trying to write about myself, on some level, I was also probably writing for myself, which I've definitely never done before. You know, even when my first book came out, I thought of by then I was like 26 or 27 years old. And so I thought of myself as very different from the characters in the book and the kinds of things that they were concerned about, and even different from the readers of the book, you know. And that is less the case here. Like here, I was writing partly for myself, partly to try to write myself back into hope, to try to write myself back toward wonder, because I was having a really difficult time, I think, when I started the book. I was struggling against despair. And I wanted to write nonfiction. I wanted to write a true story. I wanted to write a series of true stories that would help me be hopeful about human life. And so that was a very different exercise for me than writing a novel.
And between those two exercises, what do you think it was more cathartic for yourself? As in having built a whole world and this whole story where you can decide where to show a little bit about yourself, but you're protected, right? Because like maybe you can show a little bit because we cannot invent the whole thing, right? Like we are what we write, and our feelings are there as well. We're not the characters, but we are that. Maybe that, and to have this story at the end and feel that like this sense of that you have completed something, or having written these short essays, short stories about from yourself, from your point of view. What do you think it was more cathartic?
It's very interesting the way you phrase that, to say that like when you're writing fiction, you're protected in a way. And that's true, but I have to say that I began to feel much less protected in the last couple books, because people were much more conscious of who I was, right, and much more kind of reading me into those stories in ways that, I had invited by having this public life, by making videos every Tuesday. And so I began to feel like it wasn't a shield in the way that it once had been for me, that writing fiction was no longer a break from the world, which is what I always loved about it, right? Like, the terrible thing about being a person is that you're stuck for the whole time inside of one body, living one life in one place, with one consciousness that you can never get out of. And that can feel quite claustrophobic to me. And so that's something I loved about fiction. But I have to say that I began to love it less over the last several years because it didn't feel like a break. And so writing this was huge, not just hugely cathartic, it was like hugely helpful to me, because I had to find a kind of hope that could withstand the reality of suffering. And I tried to do that in all kinds of indirect, highly metaphorical ways, in my novels. And here I was just trying to do it with the kind of desperation and transparency that one has when one is being oneself. And it was very helpful to me. It really, like, I made the book as a gift, and I hope that people like it. And I've been very gratified by the response to it. But much more than any book I've ever written, I also wrote it for myself.
For me, something that really catches my attention from the Anthropocene Reviewed is that all the stories in some way play with the essence of learning and growing. It's like all the things I have known from all these years, I'm going to tell you. But at the same time, it doesn't feel condescendent in a way of, hey, I'm going to tell you what life's about and all that. So thank you. Because it's something very common, in young adult literature and all that, to have this message at the end of the book. But the way you use the stories to tell things, like it feels more like, hey, I'm discovering this at the same time as you. It's crazy.
I'm kind of super confused, just as you.
And I really want to know if it's something you do intentionally, or does it come up spontaneously in your stories?
That's a great question. I mean, I'd probably have to interrogate myself pretty deeply to answer it honestly. I think it's true. I think it's real to how my experience. Like, I really was learning about the history of Staphylococcus aureus, and I really was excited I mean, excited and a little horrified to understand this bacteria that colonizes my skin and is a constant threat to my ability to go on being a person. And I wanted to, and so, yeah, I am very focused on trying not to be condescending and like trying not to be the like wise old fish, you know, like you see that character a lot in novels, and I try to make fun of that character in The Fault in Our Stars, where like the wise old author is just an absolute monster who understands nothing about human life and should not be listened to under any circumstances. But like we like to put these wise characters into our books because they can be like the secret voice of the author, you know. But sometimes I agree, it can come across as kind of condescending, or like also like as if I don't know, I don't understand the water we're swimming in. I don't understand the internet. I don't understand like whether or not all of this stuff is good or bad. And I wanted to acknowledge that. Like I truly did want to be as confused about the complexity of the world as I am, you know. And so I wanted to like share stuff that I was learning and stuff that I thought would be helpful for other people to learn, but while also acknowledging that I am not an authority and I have no idea what's going on in the wider world. I don't even really understand what's going on inside of myself, you know?
Yeah, of course, we're not young enough to be actually able to know everything, I think. The older you get, you'll know the less and less.
Yeah.
But so did you in some way were thinking about, you know, young readers? I mean, you know, all your novels are labeled as young adult, but at the same time, you know, while you wrote this book, The Anthropocene Reviewed, were they in your mind or not at all?
I don't think that when I think about audience, I think about age that much, to be honest with you. I think about the age of the characters when I'm writing fiction, and I try to reflect what that time of life might feel like for the characters, but I don't think that much about like the readers' demographics. And when I was writing this, I was thinking mostly about, I guess I was thinking mostly about how when you're relatively new to adulthood, and I'm not that new to it at this point, but I'm still, you know, like, I'm still confused by it. But I think when you're new to adulthood, like you're trying to understand so much and you have limited context. Like maybe you always have limited context. So like one of the things I wanted to reflect in the essays is that I'm trying to understand the world, but I'm trying to understand the world from one very specific place inside of one very specific person. And that limits me. That limits all of us. And if we don't acknowledge those limitations and we don't acknowledge that perspective, that becomes very dangerous to me, I think, because then we're speaking as in absolutes and we're speaking as if there is some objective truth that is removed from our observation of it. And so I guess when I was thinking about audience, I was thinking mostly about like just trying to remind myself to be aware of the fact that I have one very particular perspective, and literally every other reader of the book will have a different perspective, and to try to make as much room for that as I could, or at least to try to acknowledge how specific my own experience is.
Can I ask you something a little specific about that? I don't need an absolute answer, of course, but so there's this one story that the very first time I heard it in the podcast, it probably is the hardest you have ever made me cry. And don't get me wrong, you've made me cry many times, but which is Googling strangers. Oh man, I don't even want to talk too much about it. But there's this thing, right? I read it and I heard it and it was just a little bit too much for my heart. And then I read the book, and this kind of comes back a little bit to this whole of telling the same story in different formats. But the book, the story itself, from the podcast to the book, is pretty much the same. Meaning, It's the same story. It's told kind of the same self-thought in English, but I'll try to explain myself. Maybe the book feels in past tense, and the podcast feels present. Meaning like verbs and things like that. So yeah, you can tell those things that you've changed. But the story itself is the same. Your feelings, what you say you feel, how you feel about these things, as a reader and a listener, feels the same. But there's one huge change for me, which is the stars that you give Googling Strangers. In the podcast, you give it 2.5 stars, and I was like, "Yeah, it sounds about right." And then in the book, you give it 4 stars, which is a huge jump. Yeah. It's a huge jump, and and thinking like, and not really like these things didn't change, so maybe it was John who had changed to give it that huge of a jump.
I think that's right. I think it's me that changed. I think what a lot of the star ratings changed between the podcast and the book, and some of it is arbitrary because star ratings are pretty arbitrary, so some of it was me trying to tell a joke about how star ratings, we give a lot of weight to them, but they're pretty, they're not that carefully considered a lot of times. But with that in particular, I wanted to express my profound gratitude to being able to know that this boy is alive. So the story is about a boy who I met when I was a chaplain.
I don't know if I'm going to be able to take it again.
No. I'll tell a quick version of it. The story is about a boy who I met when I was a chaplain at a children's hospital, and he was very seriously injured, and it was devastating. It was one of the hardest. I mean, it was devastating. There's nothing else to say about it. And I thought for many years that the boy probably had died, because that was the likely outcome. And I knew that I could Google him, and I would lay awake at night, and I would even go to the computer and start to search for his name, and then think, no, I don't want to know. And I guess what changed for me is that I started to, when I was rewriting the piece to be in the book, I was thinking about how, on the whole, I think it's good that we know. I think it's good to know. And I'm so grateful that young man, I mean, now older than I was when I was his chaplain, I'm so grateful that he's here with us, and so grateful to know that it has changed the rating for me.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And how do you feel about the fact that this book is going to be ranked everywhere in a scale of 1 to 5 stars? I mean,
it's so weird. I mean, I knew it in the abstract. Like, I thought about it a lot as I was writing the book. I was like, oh man, people are gonna make a lot of jokes in their Goodreads reviews.
For me, is the ultimate performance, because this book is kind of a manifest against star reviews. Right? So I really want to rank it now.
Well, I mean, so interestingly, it is by far my highest rated book on Goodreads and anywhere else where you search, where you could find 5-star reviews. And I find that fascinating and weird, and it makes me happy, but it shouldn't make me happy, because star ratings shouldn't matter very much, but they do matter. And I guess that's part of why I wanted to write them in the book, was because I was thinking about how weird it is that this system of evaluating experiences, of ranking them on a scale of 1 to 5 stars, has become so powerful just in the last 20 years. It didn't really exist at scale until the rise of the internet. And it's become so powerful that now, I go and look at the reviews of a restaurant, and if it's a 3.5-star restaurant, I get nervous. I feel like maybe we shouldn't go. And I do the same. Even though I make fun of star ratings in the book, they matter. They matter a lot. They matter a lot to a book's sales. They matter a lot. They're really important. And that's part of what's so strange to me about our historical moment, is there are all these things that function as a kind of like background noise in our lives, but that are really powerful. The algorithms that decide what photographs pop up at the top of our Instagram feed are incredibly powerful, not just in who gets famous and how resources get distributed, but they're also powerful in how we feel about the world, how we feel about our situation, how we feel about other human beings. Like, they really matter. And so I wanted to try to call attention to some of these background noises, whether it's those algorithms or air conditioning and the way that air conditioning has reshaped human life. And
in
so,
some
yeah,
ways,
it is.
it's kind of dehumanizing, no? In some ways,
Yeah.
to some people's work to rank,
It is. I understand why we have to do it, right? Like, I understand why there's value in it, because we do need to have discussions about what constitutes a good book or a good restaurant or a good public restroom. I mean, like, I think that my life is better if I know which public restroom is better than the other, like, that's a good thing to know. But yeah, it troubles me as well. And I think that, like, that complexity of how do we have conversations about what constitutes a good book or a good movie, while still retaining an awareness of the humanity of all the people involved, is really challenging. And like, that's a question that for me goes back to my own days as a book reviewer. Like, as a book reviewer, I felt like my primary obligation was to the audience, to the potential readers of this book. And if the book I thought was not a good example of this genre, or like it wouldn't resonate with its audience, or like it was harmful in some ways, like I felt an obligation to write about that. But at the same time, I would think like, gosh, this is a real person who's going to read this, this is a real person who wrote this book and they worked hard on it. And I don't think it's good, but I might be wrong. Like, I think part of it for me is being aware that I might be wrong. Like, I'm often wrong. And so bringing that awareness to qualitative analysis, I think, is important too.
Yeah, and sadly, I think we all feel like that, right? Like, I feel a little guilty when I have to give an amount of stars to a book. Like, I don't like it. I rather just, like, if you want to know how I feel, I have a video about it.
Right.
I don't like going like, oh yes, this all comes down to this amount of stars, because it's not. I mean,
Right.
It is arbitrary, but reading and enjoying stories, it is not. It's completely ambiguous on who you are, how you feel. Feelings are not arbitrary, and to read is to feel. Therefore, I find it very difficult to be able to give an amount of stars to a story.
Yeah, I feel the
it's
same way.
It's difficult for me. Well,
yeah,
no, it makes sense because as a storyteller.
Yeah, I mean, and I think too, like, it's also hard because the way that the algorithms work, a lot of times, like, if you can really destroy a book, like, this is just the reality. We all know this. If you can destroy a book in a way that's just going to be absolutely delicious to readers or viewers of that review, it's going to get a lot of views. Like, it's going to get a lot of views because the algorithms like outrage, they like anger, they like disgust, like, they like to make us feel these things, because that's what keeps us coming back to these platforms on the internet. And so it's a really hard thing to navigate. And I found it really hard to be a book reviewer in 2000 and 2002. I do not envy the booktubers today. It's really, really hard to know how to navigate all those complexities.
Oh, the video that I made a video, I think 2 years ago, which is the unpopular opinion tag, the book tag.
Oh, yeah.
Which is the only video of all time where I'm kind of, a little bit hater, and it worked so well. Like, it was one of the best videos of the year, and I really feel guilty because when there's feelings involved with because it's not the same to rank a bathroom than a book where
right.
I think
That's true. There's feelings involved.
Agree. There's feeling involved.
and for readers too, like readers who love a book, if somebody challenges that love of the book, readers can get very
Oh,
defensive, very, they can, because to your point, like reading is feeling, and so it does feel like your feelings get hurt, when somebody says that
yeah.
something you love isn't good. I
Yeah.
wish I what I wish for all of us is the ability to, and I need to work on this in my own life in a big way, but the ability to make space, for other people while also living in accordance with my own values and my own worldview. And that's a problem in like qualitative analysis, but it's also a problem in a lot of other parts of my life. So
And I think these feelings of, being so aware of other people's feelings come with age and maturity, of course, and
yeah,
building your own life. And maybe in your case, like becoming a father and all these things really have a lot to do in caring about other people's feelings. And sometimes I wonder, is it just growing up and maturing? Or does it have, or is it mostly about our environments, right? Like how different would have your maturity journey would have been if you maybe would have listened and moved to LA when it was a thing for you to work on these movies, for instance?
yeah, my life would be very different, and I think my worldview would be different. My values would be
Mm.
different, and we all you know we all have limited amounts of choice. I've had way more choice than most people, but the big choice in my professional life was exactly that, was that I could have moved to LA after the Fault in Our Stars movie was successful, and I could have done that. And
Mm.
I don't think I would have been good at it, but it's you don't have to be that good to make a lot of money. um, I mean, for a variety of reasons, I didn't want to do that, and I think, I wanted to try to write another novel, and that book became Turtles All the Way Down. It took a long time to write, but I eventually got there. And it was really only after that I do think that it's a process of changing. I don't know if I would say I've matured necessarily, because I'm suspicious of drawing a line from like innocence to experience, or from being naive to being wise, because I know a lot of old people who are still
Mm.
very naive, or who are
Mhm.
more, or maybe who are less wise than they were 20 years ago. Like, I don't think that life goes in a simple straight line.
Yeah.
But I do think that the way the what I wanted to write did change, and what I wanted to write became that I wanted to write directly. I wanted to write without artifice. I wanted to write directly to people about stuff that I care about, and try to communicate why I care and why I think ultimately humanity is good news. Like, yes, we
Mhm.
are a source of immense destruction. Yes, we have caused a lot of suffering. Yes, we cause terrible, unnecessary suffering among ourselves. But I still think that the proper response to consciousness is hope. I still think that we are capable, while we are capable of suffering, we are also capable of much else. And I think that I wanted to find those places of wonder and joy and connectedness and lift them up and celebrate them, because they are also real. And I wanted to do that without irony and without cynicism and without the kinds of like tricks and tools that I, bring to trying to write fiction. And I just wanted to write as directly as I could about the miracle of being alive in this world.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
in
and let me
some
tell
way,
you.
yeah,
Yeah,
just what
keep going.
a quick note, that this essence of that, life is worth living is also in your novels, in The Fault in Our
Yeah.
Stars. It's very pretty obvious, but in
Mhm.
the others ones too. So it's kind of
Yeah.
interesting that you come always with this message of, you know um, happiness overall.
I
We can
only
only
have
be so
one.
so much, right? There's
I
only
only
so
have
much one
one.
can be.
Yeah, I only have one theme, in my work, really. And it's the thing that I'm trying to say to myself, that I'm trying to say to my children, that I'm trying to say to everyone I know, that I'm trying to say to strangers. And that one thing is, we are here to pay attention. Let us pay attention. Let us find joy where we can find it, and let us alleviate suffering when we can. And I think, yeah, all of my books are about that. Like, what happens when we fail to pay attention? What happens when we fail to take care of each other? What happens when we don't treat each other as human beings? And yeah, that's the theme to me, but also like, that's the theme of everything. Like, yeah, I am very taken with that idea, because like, I can't get out of bed in the morning if I don't have hope, real hope, that things can get better, that there are joyful times ahead, that life is worth the effort, and that humanity is redeemable.
This makes absolute sense on why you like football so much, because football is the ultimate act of hope, right? Like, that's what really is.
Yeah, football is, that is exactly right. It is not about whether or not a ball goes across a line. It is about having and being able to hold on to hope, even in the most ridiculous, impossible situations. So, yeah. That is what I love about football.
Do you have anything?
Yeah, well, while we're here, I really want to talk about success, because I think you're a great example of that. Or I don't know how you perceive yourself, but you really seem for me like a successful author. Of course, with your past publications being The Fault in Our Stars, the peak of those years when you debuted first in the New York Times bestseller for children's chapter books, being translated into more than 55 languages worldwide. And I really want to know, first, how was it for you to manage such an enormous impact as an author? And secondly, did it feel differently from the success that you have achieved and experiences in YouTube and all the other internet platforms where you are? Like, does it feel the same to sell 2 million books, or to have 2 million views, or to, how you compare it?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, I think that it felt different at the time because mainstream media did not pay attention to YouTube. And so like, you could have an extremely successful YouTube channel, and nobody was ever going to make like a Saturday Night Live sketch making fun of your YouTube channel, because nobody who wrote for Saturday Night Live ever watched YouTube. And so it was, the thing that was very different about it for me is probably less different now, because now being very successful on YouTube also draws a lot of attention from US pop culture and broader like media. It was great in the sense that I am very, very grateful for the success of those books, and very, very grateful for the chance to, travel the world. Like, I'd never been to Spain before, like, and so that was cool. And it came with a lot of wonderful things, obviously, and financial security for our family, which is a huge deal. But it was also really difficult, and I talk about that some in this book, because it was disorienting. It felt like a lot of pressure at times, and I felt and was totally unworthy of that kind of success and attention, and I struggled with that a lot. And then I also struggled with just not knowing how to handle myself in on the internet. Like, I didn't know how to handle myself in public, because I'd never been in that situation before, and it was a weird situation to be in. So I am very grateful for it, but to be honest with you, I am also, it's not an experience that I would want to repeat. Like, I'm happy it happened once.
And how you feel about it now? Are you used to it now, or?
Oh, it mostly feels over, to be honest with you. Like, I don't think there's any risk that Saturday Night Live is going to make a sketch about the Anthropocene Reviewed. So But yeah, no, I feel much
I
more.
mean,
I feel
we'll
much more
see.
comfortable with it now. We'll see. We'll see.
We'll
But
see.
they won't make a movie because I won't sell the rights. But I feel much
I
more.
actually
I feel
support this
much.
decision. Continue.
Thank you. Thank you. I feel much more comfortable now and much more. I also just like, I think I've had a lot of time to get used to having a different kind of relationship with my audience than I had when I was starting out. And so I feel a lot more comfortable in general in my life. And I think a big part of that, honestly, is like still living in Indianapolis, where like everybody here knows who I am, but they also know who my best friend is. You know, like my best friend is this big, tall, very charismatic guy. And, you know, one time I was complaining to him, I was like, you know, every time I go to Target, somebody stops me and I'm like with my kids and I'm trying to like wrangle my kids while also, and my buddy Chris was like, you know what, man, every time I go to Target, I also get recognized by someone I went to middle school with or by somebody I played golf with 6 months ago. And I'm also wrangling my kids and I'm not complaining about the difficulties of fame. Like it's just a byproduct of, and so living in a smaller city has actually been really good for me in that way.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good friend. We do need our
Oh, he's
reality
great.
checkup sometimes. Yeah.
Oh, he's
Well,
your number one source for reality checks.
that's very nice. Well, we really could be talking here forever, if you ask me. But we do have to finish up. Sebas, is there anything else you wanna ask or say before we finish this up?
No, thank you so much for keep writing and of course
Yeah.
for being here today with us.
Oh, it's such a
Yes, John.
joy.
Thank you.
I'm a fan of both of yours and very, very, very grateful to you for taking the time to do this today. It's really nice to see you six years on from the Paper Towns media tour, and very nice to meet you as well. And I'm just so excited and grateful to you both for doing this. This has been really fun.
Oh,
Thank you, John. Hopefully, we could.
Yeah, we could start like a new tradition and, you know, share sometime 6 years later, like in
Let's do it.
2027, like, for example.
Let's do it.
That sounds nice. And
Yeah.
if I get invited and we do it IRL, I'll make sure I'll bring some hot nuts for Sarah, your wife, in case you steal them.
Oh man, she will be so
Will
grateful.
that convince you? Is that what I need to add to, like, come to Mexico, present a book, we'll get you hot nuts for Sarah? Like, that's it. Listen, we'll do it. We can do it.
Sarah was in Mexico recently and like came back with like 5 pounds of hot nuts. Is my wife's favorite snack, and so every time she goes to Mexico, she like comes back with a suitcase full of hot nuts.
Yeah, I told this to someone and they were like, how do you know that? And I was like, I have no idea. I have no idea where I have this information. I don't know, but I just know it. And listen, I'm gonna go with it. I'll get Sarah hot nuts because I also love her work, both her book, the art assignment, the whole thing. So say hi to her as well. Thank you.
I will.
She really is.
And thank you again. It's been such a pleasure, and I look forward to doing it again in 2027, if not sooner.
Okay, let's try sooner. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Y
Bye.
para todos los que nos escuchan desde España, México, Latinoamérica en general, recuerden Tu mundo y el mío, el nuevo libro de John Green, una nueva oportunidad única para conocerlo desde una nueva perspectiva, ¿no? Como contador de historias, pero con un proyecto más personal. ¿Verdad, Fa?
Muy, la verdad, creemos que lo van a disfrutar mucho conocer esta otra faceta de John, que ya la conocemos por medio de videos, pero si ustedes solo conocen sus historias escritas, lo van a disfrutar. Denle una oportunidad, al final del día eso es lo único que necesitan las historias, una oportunidad. Y recuerden que si le ponen pocas estrellas, está bien, es arbitrario, no pasa nada, no nos lo vamos a tomar a mal. Esperemos la disfruten y muchas gracias a John, a todo, al equipo de Plaza Hannes que hizo esto posible también. Fue un placer estar aquí contigo, Sebas, y
igualmente.
Pues, ojalá lo vemos pronto.
Sí, and that's all. Bye, John.
Bye. Thank y'all again. That was so fun.
Oh my God.